I'm your host, Dr. Karen Ferguson, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Dallas Kratzer, a veteran, educator, and prior learning assessment expert. We are going to discuss the important role of prior learning assessment for institutions and students. So, Dallas, how about we dive right in?
Sounds like a great plan to me. And thank you, Karen, for having me on today.
Absolutely. Will you tell our listeners a little bit about you?
I refer to myself as a mutt because I'm a mixture of a lot of different things. But the driving factor in the area of credit for prior learning and why I'm so interested in this and what we can do is because it goes back to my own history. I'm a first generation student. My mom did not finish high school. My dad didn't go to college. It was a very foreign world to me. And fortunately, being in the military, I did 35 years in the Air Force. But while I was in the Air Force, I realized I needed to get my college degree. So I started working on it and found this interesting concept of the American Council on Education Military Guide. And that military guide helped me to see how my Air Force training could be converted over to college credit. Now, we know the Air Force has got the community college to the Air Force, but there were a lot of other things that I wasn't aware of. So it helped me to get started. And then I learned about CLEP exams and how we could use those. Really launched me into higher ed. And I finished my bachelor's degree and I started teaching for Central Texas College. Didn't realize I could do that with a bachelor's degree. That opened up to teaching junior Air Force ROTC at the University of Louisville. While I was there, finished my terminal degree, but really jumped into credit for prior learning while I was there because of a program they had. And that's where you and I first met,
Yes.
over there finishing our PhDs and doing amazing stuff. Well, in the next few years, I really got into it pretty heavily and retired in 2015 and got a chance to be a faculty evaluator for the American Council on Education. I've done 30 plus evaluations in that time and got involved with the Council on Adult and Experiential Learning, have done some great things with them, have learned a ton of stuff. And it really stokes the fire for me on my passion on helping service members to realize that their military workplace learning has credit that can be used to complete a degree. They're so close to being done that they don't even realize it.
Yep.
Then we can translate that to the civilian sector too. It's the same thing. They're so close, they just don't realize it.
Right. So I think today our conversation might get a little acronym heavy. So before we get started, let's talk through some of the terms our listeners might not be familiar with. We have CPL, PLA, JST, ACE, and we could probably go on and on. What do you think are the most important ones that people understand today?
Well, definitely CPL. That's credit for prior learning. There's a whole laundry list of things that people call it: experiential learning, workplace learning, credit for earning credit for what you know. But CPL really is the core of it: credit for prior learning, and you could even abbreviate that to CL, credit for learning, because that's what it's all about. It's you've learned outside of the four walls of academia, and we're going to recognize that as college equivalent credit. And the second one, of course, would be PLA, which is prior learning assessment. That was kind of the buzzword for a long time, but prior learning assessment is an element of CPL in the fact that we're doing the assessment, which is different from the learning that goes on. So just knowing the difference between the two. And then for our military audience, the JST, the Joint Service Transcript, incredibly important. And also for staff at the colleges and universities, because this is how the military, except for the Air Force, takes the learning and converts it to college credit through the American Council on Education. And then colleges and universities can transfer that in and recognize it toward degree completion. How's that?
Yeah, and the way I think about it is PLA is the way to CPL, right? Prior learning assessment is the process that institutions use to award credit for prior learning. And sometimes those two words are used interchangeably. And I think one is kind of the means to the other, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. That's exactly what it is. So that's why I'm glad we're going to CPL. That's overarching. There are lots of things that are CPL.
And so when you think about credit for prior learning, there's benefits for everyone. Or what do you think are the benefits for students, universities?
Let's start with the workforce, okay? The workforce hasn't been recognized as well in this whole credit for prior learning CPL world. learning goes on in many different ways and shapes. The military, which might surprise some folks, are on the leading edge of recognizing workplace learning, on the job training, credit for the training that they do in preparations for their military job. So they're way far ahead on it. Workforce could mimic exactly what the military is doing because everything that's done in the military has typically a correlation to the civilian sector. And we can recognize that military workplace learning and say, how do we apply this to the jobs we see in our workforce? And I'm in Kentucky. We're doing some pretty good work and starting to recognize that. But across the country, there's a real wave to go, hey, if you're an IT professional, you've got some skills that are equivalent to college credit. So let's see how we can recognize that. Or if you've been a volunteer in a nonprofit organization and you kept the books, maybe you have some accounting experience. So this is where it rolls into the benefit to the students. Students, once they start to understand what CPL is, they can go to their colleges and universities and say, hey, you know what? I did this. Is there a chance that you would recognize this as college equivalent credit? And the universities then get the opportunity to benefit from it because when students are coming to them saying, hey, CPL, can I use this? If they've developed their own CPL program, they can say, yes, we can recognize that. We will help to accelerate your degree completion, thereby attracting more students who would never have come to higher education if it hadn't been for the opportunity. And Kale did some pretty interesting reports in the last few years about that. The driving force here is if we will work with workforce and universities to attract students, then we have a force multiplier because not only are they getting degrees, but they're getting that knowledge worker skill that we need so much in our economy today.
And I know I've had the pleasure of teaching students that are in a program that's very heavily focused on prior learning assessment. And personally, I find them a lot easier to teach. They have context, right? They're bringing all of this experience. Sometimes they don't even know what they know. I'll give you an example. I also benefited from a program that had a lot of PLA and didn't realize how much of my leadership experience translated directly for credit. I didn't know the terms. I didn't know the leadership model or the motivational model or theory behind what I already knew. But it was common sense. So I think students who have that experience, they can just absorb the knowledge so much better because they have those compartments that they can relate to and put information to. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And that's the amazing thing. These students who are post-traditional students, they're not the traditional student, post-traditional adult learners, whatever you want to call them, they do bring a lot to the table. They've been in the workforce. And when you start saying, oh, this is how this aligns with college credit recommendations, they're like, really? Wow, I've done this. Folks who do presentations on a regular basis in their job, they have to get up and they have to prepare the PowerPoint presentation, and they're giving it to an audience of, audience of one, sometimes up to 1,000, 10,000, whatever the case may be. They have great public speaking skills that they may have honed over the years, or maybe they've been involved with a program like Toastmasters, which allows you to come in and people challenge you on how you're doing your public speaking. Well, that's all those things that we can use as artifacts to say, yes, you have achieved a certain level of public speaking equivalent to a college course.
And then on the university side, was it Kale, right, that said 17% higher retention rates for students? Do you think that's because of that experience, or do you think that's because they're so much further along in their degree and they're kind of a higher intent student?
It's a little bit of both. There's an intrinsic value to completing a college degree. And what we do when we introduce students to credit for prior learning, or better yet, when we introduce non-students to credit for prior learning, they will then become students because all of a sudden it becomes attainable. This is a challenge they never thought they could complete. I love it. I used to do a class with U.S. Army recruiters, and I would start the class off by talking about, I would talk to them about getting into the university and such, and they weren't in college, and some were and some weren't. How many of you have completed college? So many would raise their hands. How many have some college, no degree? And then there was this last part. It was about a third of the audience typically that I'd say, how many of you don't have any college background at all? They'd raise their hands. I'm like, stop, put your hand down. That was a trick question. Let's pull out your JST and let's look at how much credit you have already earned. And to hear people go, I'm college material. I've got credit already.
Yep.
They were amazed, and it would consume them. And then they became great students because here was something that somebody might have told them all along. You're not college credit material. You're not smart enough. And we're showing them, oh, yes, you are, because you're already doing it. And then they get motivated, they have the drive, and they do it. So it's a little bit of everything, and each student is unique.
Great. So lots of benefits. There's also a lot of legislation right now in support of PLA, right? According to WICHE, 35 states and District of Columbia have policy or legislation requiring institutions to award credit for military experience. 26 have the same thing for post-secondary education students to accept credit for minimum AP scores. And 27 states have policy or legislation that require institutions to award credit for prior learning outside of military and or AP experience. And that's relatively new, right? Making sure that we're awarding credit, not just for military, not just for standardized tests, but for that workplace, non-military work experience. States like Colorado and Indiana have also really seemed to take a public stance on the need for CPL. But we still don't really hear much about it in mainstream conversations. What's the disconnect? Why do you think that is?
I think the disconnect is because there are a lot of schools and legislatures that are saying, yes, we're going to do CPL, but they don't know what that means. It sounds good. It's the current rage or fad, if you will. Yes, we'll do CPL, but CPL is such a broad umbrella. And schools can say, yes, we're doing CPL if they accept CLEP exams. That's a type of CPL. If they're accepting AP classes from high school students, that's CPL. But they're not getting down to the nitty gritty of working with industry to identify workplace learning, just as ACE does for the military. We need to do something like that for the civilian sector. ACE has an element of their organization that does that. It's called the National Guide. And a great example from that is there are two of them. You've got Google IT has been recognized as up to 12 credit hours of IT learning that can be brought into an associate program. And there's also the Dollar General. Everybody's got a Dollar General store around them. True. ACE evaluated the Dollar General store manager training. 9 credit hours that could be brought into an associate degree or even a bachelor's degree. But so many legislators and so many staff members at colleges and universities are doing a good thing, but they're not doing the right thing. Okay. And I hate to be harsh like that, but they don't understand what CPL is and how it can be maximized. They're taking the low hanging fruit and saying, well, we'll do this, but they're not diving in deep. And that's what I think is the disconnect. If you look at some of these things, there's an organization, MCMC, Multi-State Collaboration on Military Credit, and they've done some research also, and they've highlighted what the different legislators have put forward and what has passed, and it's weak. I mean, we really need to make that a little bit more robust on how we're going to provide recommendations and recognize that credit.
Yeah, and I think to your point, there's so many different ways to think about credit for prior learning. And I think the most difficult way is probably by assessing someone's work experience. AP exams have a cut score, CLEP exams have a different type of score, but taking someone's work experience holistically and figuring out how much credit that's worth could be a challenge. Why do you think, or what do you think is behind that challenge for institutions to jump in and partner with organizations and look at their corporate training or set up portfolio experiences? Why do you think that's such a challenge for institutions?
Well, on the front end, there's a heavy load to establish a program. A lot of schools have a credit for prior learning director, but normally it's an additional job on top of other things that they're doing. You need to have someone who understands CPL and then can guide the faculty in how to do an assessment. This goes back to your comment about PLA. Prior learning assessment is a challenge. You have to have training to do that, to understand what you're looking for. Colleges and universities need to understand how to set up their learning outcomes in a equitable manner to where no matter what the environment is, that you'll be able to challenge it for credit for prior learning. For example, if you have a course and the syllabus says, based on the reading from book XYZ or from lecture ABC, what did you learn? Well, that box is a petition for a portfolio for that class, because now you have to have been in that class to be able to answer that learning outcome. So there are those hoops that they have to jump through. There are some challenges also because of the culture of our institutions. They don't see credit for prior learning as a valuable means to recognize what's going on. And some of them even see it as a challenge to their employment, which it is not.
Right.
We need to get over those cultural hangups. And then students are also a challenge. They don't realize, because it's not their world, they don't realize they could potentially have credit for prior learning. So it's a real education for staff and faculty and students and educators, legislators, and business, because business is about the bottom line. They're not worried about, can my employees get credit for this? They're more worried about, are they producing? Are they providing the services that we need? Are they manufacturing the things that need to be produced? But the other challenge that sometimes business misses out on is that succession training and investing in their people, and recognizing that if we grow our own by helping them complete their degree so that they can move into leadership and management positions, we benefit greatly and our society benefits greatly. And we reduce our human resources costs because now we're going to retain people longer. So it's really a whole ecosystem that we need to change. And this is not unlike the same change we had to go through with distance learning. If you think back 10, 15 years ago, people were like, oh, distance learning, yeah, Blackboard and Canvas and any other learning management system you want to talk about, that's just a fad. It'll go away. Well, COVID accelerated us into the fact that no, it's not going away. And it is a very viable means to complete college credit courses. And those schools that were not prepared for it suffered. Some of them shut down, So it's not a fad. CPL is not a fad. It will not go away. We've had CPL for decades and people just haven't realized it.
It seems like for PLA processes to be effective, the university really has to embrace a culture of support for the quality of learning that takes place outside of the traditional classroom. What is your advice for faculty or academic leaders who want to implement or improve credit for prior learning at their universities?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things that need to happen. First of all, they need to find out what they're doing and how they're doing it. And then there are organizations out there that can help them to expand what they're doing, to start doing something if they're not doing anything. And by getting out and involved in CALE, Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, I think that's going to help them also. CALE, I am a CALE ambassador, so I am going to throw a plug out there for the CALE conference this fall. Every fall, it's in November. It lays the foundation for how you can do CPL and how to get started. So I think that's a great place to go. Okay, there aren't many organizations that do that. Your organization has some great opportunities, I think, too. So getting the word out on how they can use resources like your organization, CALE, the American Council on Education, to advance what they're doing. There are a couple of places that they can get some additional information just to see if this is where they want to go. I wrote a paper for WICHE a couple of years ago on recognizing learning in military and corporate settings. That will give them some information. They can drive in that direction. There's great stuff done by Nan Travers up in the Empire State area. But just get involved, get into the community, and start learning more of what's going on. ACE did a great article back in 2015 about implementing your plan for TPL programs. So jump in, learn, bring somebody along who knows this into your organization to help you advance what you're.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point. The community that supports credit for prior learning is very open. It's not about how to set up a prior learning assessment model, or really understanding the different ways that you can assess credit for prior learning. I think anyone that has that expertise is willing to share it.
They are, because the end goal is helping people to change their lives. I shared that I was a first generation student. By getting my degree, it opened up a lot of doors for me. And as those doors continue to open, it changed my world. And 1994, when I walked across the stage to get my bachelor's degree, there were two young men that were in the audience. They were 9 and 12 at that time. And they said, "Dad, saw how you did it. It's great, but don't want to do it that way." And we never had to convince those boys to go to college. They told us they were going to go to college. And today, they're 37 and 40. One is a lawyer. The other completed his terminal degree in ministry. So he has a doctorate in ministry. Both of them went to college right out of high school. It changed their world. So I have my sinister and my minister, since I have a lawyer and a minister. And their worlds are so different from my world. It changed their lives. It really did. My wife and I are constantly amazed. And then, even for my wife, who is the smartest of the whole bunch, at 49, she went back to college, got her nursing degree. And it's amazing how education opens up so many doors. Our life is so different now than the trajectory that we were on prior to doing that. And credit for prior learning has been the vehicle to do that.
Excellent. So I think this has been a changing for higher education. Or as an industry, do you think we're just going to keep doing what we've always been doing?
Yes, there's a future, and it will be different than it is today. And yes, there will be a lot of them that will keep doing what they're doing and not embrace it at all. All right. So let me explain both of those. Many schools are getting it. They realize, just like they did with distance learning and online learning using the internet, they get that if we don't pivot and make the change in our program to be able to serve a different community, we're going to miss out, because in 2025, we hit the cliff. And the cliff is where we're not going to have enough graduating high school students to fill the workplace need by the time they complete college. We've got to go to the adult learner. 74% of our student population are non-traditional, post-traditional learners, folks who are employed full-time or part-time, have family, have obligations to take care of others. That's the greatest pool of individuals that we can tap into. And many of them have said, "I'm not college material. I can't do this. I work. I have to make money to be able to provide for my family." And they don't see education as an opportunity. And there are many schools that are realizing that and working that direction. Unfortunately, there are some predatory schools that are in that arena, the diploma mills that we've heard about in the past. But more traditional brick and mortar schools have come online and said, "Yes, we're going to do this the right way." Now, the problem is the second part of your question: will higher ed keep doing what they've always done? Yeah, there are a lot of schools, particularly the bigger state schools, that will just keep doing what they're doing because they think it works. But when those high school seniors start drying up and the population becomes smaller and smaller and there's more competition for it, then it's going to be a real challenge. And here's another element to that many people don't think about. In today's workforce, certificates get you jobs, degrees get you into management, and they can get certificates anywhere. Community college, civilian training programs. So there are many options. And if you don't embrace how you're going to bring certificates into your degree completion, you will become irrelevant. Okay. You won't have a dog in the fight. That's just my 2 cents worth on it.
Yeah, and you said something that kind of sparked my memory as well. I think, we've been talking about this enrollment cliff for close to a decade, right? And we're talking
Right.
about all of the, 18 to 22-year-olds that aren't going to be available
Right.
or interested potentially with some of the impressions of
Right.
higher education in attending college straight out of high school. Yet we went from 39 million to 40.4 million Americans who have some college, no degree, and are in our workforce. It represents about 20% of our workforce that has some college, no degree, and work experience. And I just wonder if institutions were to really open up their minds around creating effective prior learning assessments, if they wouldn't be able to solve some of their enrollment woes by really focusing on
I
serving a
totally
different
agree. So
student
let me throw one more
population.
thing out there for you that'll really make you think. We spend a lot of money on trying to get eighth graders to go to college, programs that are designed to attract them into STEM, into STEAM, all this stuff. And they get to their senior years and they choose something different. They go into a certificate type of situation where they can get a job quickly. What if we turned this around and turned it on its head? And instead of investing the money in an eighth grader, why not invest the money in the parents of an eighth grader and get one of them to complete their degree? Because research has shown if at least one of the parents has a degree, the student is more likely, the secondary education student is more likely to go and complete a degree. And if we can get both parents with a degree, it becomes a force multiplier. So now we've not targeted one person and gotten one degree. We've targeted three people and will achieve one degree short term. And then in the long term, a second degree and potentially a third degree. This is how we really revolutionize the way we do higher education. What do you think about that?
I think it's an excellent point. And before we bring it to a close, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners? Any other ideas or words of
words of wisdom
wisdom?
might be challenging, but I can give you my 2 cents worth, my opinion. And that is at least look at credit for prior learning and how you might be able to use it within your system. It's worth the look. Don't just say it's something we're not interested in because that's not who we are. People learn everywhere, and we need to recognize the learning that is college equivalent learning as credit. That will help bring more students our way. It will help our economy to build a workforce that is well established and can compete internationally, which it becomes a national security issue because we're losing. There's a brain drain that's going on. People come here to get education, or at least that's how it was. And now it's changing because other countries are getting on board with the education factor. And people who get educated here go other places. Our technology gets ripped off constantly. We need to continue to grow our workforce. And with the cyber challenges ahead of us, we need to grow that area. So look at it. Now, I would like to throw out one more challenge. Probably the one area that could be the most influential are those state level higher education institutions who guide our schools. I am a senior fellow at the Council on Post-Secondary Education in Kentucky, and we are doing that very thing. We are setting a marker on what CPL should look like at our schools in Kentucky. And we're building out this program, and other state programs that will do that will help their states to do more with less and to do more with those who want to do more. So more with more. Indiana has got a great program going on too. And there's a lot of silos that are coming down. We need to keep pulling those silos down. So there you go. That's my opinion or my thoughts.
Excellent. And thank you so much, Dallas, for this conversation. I think we all learned a lot about prior learning assessment, credit for prior learning, and the potential positive impact for, let's be real, everybody, right? Students, universities, workforce,